February 1959. Ural Mountains, Russia. A group of rescuers, navigating the unforgiving terrain, stumbled upon a scene that would haunt investigators and theorists for decades to come. Strewn across the snowy landscape were the mangled bodies of 9 hikers. These names would soon become etched in history as part of one of the most mysterious and chilling incidents ever recorded. In the winter of 1959, amidst the biting cold and towering peaks of the Ural Mountains, a determined and adventurous leader named Igor Dyatlov stood at the helm of a daring expedition. Igor was the kind of guy who thrived on challenges. Friends would describe him as fearless and passionate about exploration. His dream had always been to conquer the untamed wilderness, and this expedition was his biggest adventure yet, inspired by his previous successful treks, and driven by a desire to achieve the highest certification of Soviet mountaineering. Igor meticulously planned this journey into the heart of the Ural Mountains. Igor didn't embark on this journey alone. He was joined by 8 companions, fellow students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, each one eager to take on the adventure of a lifetime. Together they made a tightly knit team, united by their shared love for the mountains and the thrill of discovery. The expedition began to take shape in late January 1959, when Igor and his companions gathered in Sverdlovsk, a city at the foothills of the Ural Mountains. They meticulously planned their journey into the northern Urals, aiming to conquer Otorten Mountain and the surrounding area. On January 25, 1959, they departed by train to Vishay, a small village that served as their starting point. From there, they embarked on a challenging trek through the dense Siberian wilderness, battling harsh conditions and unforgiving terrain. By early February 1959, they established a base camp at the foot of Kholat Syakhl, known as the Dead Mountain. This location marked their last known camping ground. The name itself, Dead Mountain, is a translation from the Mansi language, and it already had an ominous reputation. What happened after this is shrouded in mystery and has haunted investigators and theorists for decades. But what we do know is this: when rescuers finally reached the abandoned campsite weeks later, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The tents, torn open from within, flapped limply in the biting cold, their contents spilling out into the snow. Personal belongings were scattered in disarray, some frozen solid into the icy ground, suggesting a chaotic and panicked departure. Footprints, barely visible in the snow, led away from the campsite and into the darkness, disappearing without a trace. The bodies of Igor Dyatlov and his companions were discovered scattered across the slopes of Dead Mountain, each one bearing injuries as baffling as they were severe. Some had succumbed to hypothermia, their frozen faces etched with expressions of terror and pain. Others showed signs of blunt force trauma, as if struck by a tremendous force in the dead of night. Lyudmila Dubinina's body was particularly disturbing, her eyes and tongue inexplicably missing, leaving a haunting void in her otherwise serene expression. Lyudmila and several others suffered internal injuries without external wounds, suggesting an immense and sudden pressure or impact. Igor Dyatlov himself had a fractured skull and chest injuries consistent with a high-velocity impact, indicating a violent and abrupt end. As investigators meticulously combed through the evidence, they uncovered more puzzling clues. Some victims had traces of radiation on their clothing, hinting at exposure to an unknown source. Others bore inexplicable burns and abrasions, possibly sustained during desperate attempts to survive the freezing conditions. Today, we delve into 3 possible explanations for the Dyatlov Pass incident. Each one as chilling and perplexing as the last. Story 1. The Yeti Massacre. Their journey began with laughter and camaraderie, their spirits high as they trekked through the snowy wilderness. However, as they delved deeper into the desolate expanse, an unsettling series of events began to unfold, turning their adventure into a harrowing mystery that remains unsolved to this day. It was on the 3rd day of their hike that the group first noticed something odd. Large, deep footprints appeared in the snow, far larger than any human or known animal in the area. They seemed to follow the group at a distance, always there in the morning. The hikers tried to rationalize the footprints, blaming the snow or their own imaginations. But an eerie feeling of being watched settled over them. On the fourth night, as the group huddled in their tent against the biting cold, they heard a series of loud, crashing noises in the forest. It sounded as if large trees were being snapped like twigs, followed by heavy footsteps thudding through the underbrush. The hikers exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding in the silence that followed. They knew no animal native to the area could make such sounds, but they dismissed it as the shifting ice or a distant avalanche. By the fifth day, the unease had grown. Equipment started to go missing. An axe, a flashlight, even a few provisions. The hikers were meticulous about their gear, and the idea of misplacing it seemed improbable. Yuri Doroshenko, one of the more vocal members, suggested that something or someone was taking their items. Tension mounted as they searched the area, finding no trace of their missing belongings. That night, while some were inside the tent and others gathered around a small fire, Lyudmila Dubanina decided to step away from the group for a moment. As she stood alone in the darkness, she spotted a massive figure at the tree line. Just beyond the reach of the fire's light, it was tall, much taller than any man, with broad shoulders and a hunched posture. As she watched in horror, the figure seemed to notice her, its head turning slowly in her direction. Then, with an almost supernatural speed, it leaped away into the shadows. Lyudmila ran back to the group, breathless and pale, recounting her sighting in frantic whispers. That night, Igor Dyatlov wrote in his journal, trying to make sense of what Lyudmila had seen. His entry ended with a chilling note. From now on, we know that snowmen exist. Over the next few days, more of the group began to experience strange encounters. Zinaida Kolmogorova reported feeling an intense gaze following her whenever she ventured away from the others. Rustam Slobodin found massive footprints again, but this time circling their campsite. Though initially dismissing it as the footsteps of the local hunters, he very soon realized that the footprints were too deep and too big to be made by any human. The group's morale began to fracture, their once tight-knit bond fraying under the strain of the unknown threat. As the seventh night fell, the group set up camp on the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl. The air was thick with tension as they gathered in their tent, sharing their unsettling experiences. The wind howled outside, but it was a different sound that froze them in their tracks. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the night, unlike anything they had ever heard. It was a sound of raw, primal power, filled with menace. Panic spread through the group like wildfire as they heard the large footsteps getting very close. Scrambling out of their tent, some half-dressed, they ran into the freezing wilderness, abandoning their camp and eventually each other. The roar grew louder, closer, and more terrifying. Yuri Doroshenko, clutching a flashlight, caught a glimpse of movement in the trees. A massive, hulking figure moved with surprising agility, its eyes reflecting the beam of his light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, covered in thick fur, exuding an aura of raw strength and primal fear. The creature roared again, and Yuri felt his blood turn to ice. Igor Dyatlov, trying to gather the group, shouted for everyone to stay together. But the terror was overwhelming. Lyudmila Dubanina, trembling, pointed toward a shadow moving swiftly through the trees.
"It's coming!"
She screamed, her voice barely audible over the howling wind and the creature's roars. As the group scattered, Zinaida Kolmogorova tripped over a fallen branch, her screams piercing the night as she saw the creature looming above her. Rustam Slobodin, in a desperate act of bravery, tried to distract it, shouting and waving his arms. The creature turned its attention to him, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The hikers, driven by sheer terror, ran further into the forest, their breath visible in the frigid air. The creature gave chase, its heavy footsteps pounding behind them. Yuri, his heart racing, turned to see the beast closing in. In a last-ditch effort, he grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the creature. but it swatted him aside with ease, sending him sprawling into the snow. Igor, realizing they couldn't outrun the beast, shouted for everyone to climb the nearest trees. Some of the group scrambled up, their fingers numb from the cold. They clung to the branches, their breaths ragged, as the creature circled below, its roars shaking the very ground they stood on. For what felt like an eternity, they stayed silent, hoping the creature would lose interest, but it didn't. It prowled around the base of the trees, looking for them, its growls reverberating through the night. The hikers could do nothing but watch in horror as it eventually moved away, disappearing into the darkness. Hours passed before they dared to come down. Exhausted, frostbitten, and traumatized, the remaining group staggered back to their camp, hoping their friends had returned. As they rummaged through the wreckage, a sudden, blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by more screams and the same terrifying roar. The hikers at the tent stood frozen in fear, knowing the creature had caught up with their friends. The screams were filled with agony and desperation, echoing through the forest and making the hairs on their necks stand on end. Unable to do anything but listen, the remaining hikers felt a crushing sense of helplessness and dread. They knew they had to escape, but the terror was paralyzing. Driven by fear, they fled into the freezing darkness, eventually losing each other, their bodies shaking from cold and fear. One by one, they succumbed to either the brutal cold or to the creature. And eventually, silence fell over the mountain. Their bodies were later found in various states of distress, scattered across the mountain, evidence of their desperate flight. Among the belongings recovered, a journal entry stood out. "From now on, we know that snowmen exist." The chilling message, combined with the mysterious circumstances of their deaths, fueled the legend of the Yeti, a mysterious creature said to roam the frozen peaks, forever intertwined with the tragic fate of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Story 2. Military experiments. In February 1959, a group of 9 Soviet students, led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on an ambitious expedition to the remote Ural Mountains. Their goal was to reach the summit of Mount Otorten, a journey that required traversing the treacherous snow-covered wilderness. The group was well prepared and experienced, but their adventure would soon take a dark turn. On the 4th day of their hike, the group came across something peculiar. As they explored the wilderness, one of the hikers noticed a tree that looked out of place. Unlike the other trees, it seemed unaffected by the snow. Igor, the wilderness expert, found it suspiciously odd and decided to investigate. Calling his fellow hikers, they approached the tree and discovered it was not a tree at all. It was a cleverly disguised cover. Pushing the fake tree aside, they uncovered a hidden tunnel. The tunnel stretched for miles, twisting and turning through the frozen earth, and at times splitting off into a series of even more tunnels. The darkness inside was overwhelming, with every step amplifying their sense of unease. The group, driven by curiosity, ventured inside despite their growing unease. After what felt like hours, they reached a gate covered with warning signs. Rumors of a highly experimental government base in the area had circulated for years, but these rumors had always been dismissed as tall tales. Now, faced with undeniable evidence, they debated what to do next. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to break in. Inside, they found themselves in a labyrinth of cold, metallic hallways. Rooms filled with large weapons and strange machinery lined the corridors. Some contained documents hinting at secret experiments. The Russian government was known for its clandestine operations, conducting experimental research far from prying eyes. The hikers' discovery of the base filled them with both awe and dread. They knew they had stumbled upon something significant, something dangerous. Their exploration was cut short when they were suddenly apprehended by soldiers. The group was captured and taken deeper into the facility. For days, they were held captive, subjected to brutal interrogations and torturous methods. The soldiers were ruthless, using electric shocks, waterboarding, and psychological manipulation to break the hikers' spirits. They sought to extract every bit of information about their presence and discoveries. The hikers endured unimaginable suffering. The injuries they sustained during this time would later be found on their bodies, fueling speculation about what had happened. They were exposed to high levels of radiation, a byproduct of the secret weapons testing conducted at the facility. The radiation left their skin burned and their bodies weakened, adding another layer of horror to their ordeal. Eventually, the captors decided they needed to cover up the incident. The hikers were drugged with experimental substances, leaving them disoriented and helpless. They were injected with powerful hallucinogens that caused them to experience vivid nightmares and intense paranoia. In the dead of night, the captors transported the hikers back to the wilderness. Left out in the freezing cold, disoriented and weakened, the hikers had no chance of survival. They wandered aimlessly in the snow, their minds plagued by the hallucinations and the lingering effects of the drugs. The cold seeped into their bones, and one by one, they succumbed to the harsh elements. When rescuers discovered their remains, the injuries and circumstances puzzled investigators. The traces of radiation on some of their clothing added to the mystery. The truth of their ordeal was buried deep within the shadows of government secrecy, leaving only fragments of evidence and unanswered questions. The Dyatlov Pass incident became synonymous with mystery, forever intertwined with the sinister possibilities of secret military experiments and the tragic fate of 9 brave students who ventured too far into the unknown. The radiation found on their bodies and the strange injuries sustained hinted at a dark cover-up, suggesting that they had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see and paid the ultimate price for their curiosity. Story 3. Supernatural Forces. In January 1959, 9 experienced hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out for a challenging trek through the Ural Mountains. Their journey took them to Kholat Syakhl, a place the indigenous Mansi people ominously called Dead Mountain. This is their story. On the 4th day of their hike, the group of 9 experienced hikers noticed an unsettling change in the atmosphere as they approached Kholat Syakhl. The air grew thick, and an unnatural silence blanketed the forest, broken only by the crunching of their boots in the snow. That night, as they settled into their tents, strange occurrences began. They discovered eerie carvings on the trees surrounding their camp, symbols that seemed ancient and otherworldly. The group exchanged uneasy glances, dismissing it as local folklore or the work of mischievous locals. By the 5th day, a sense of dread had settled over them. Zinaida Kolmogorova reported seeing shadowy figures flitting between the trees, but when they investigated, they found nothing. That night, whispers carried by the wind filled their ears, making it impossible to sleep peacefully. On the 6th day, the strangeness intensified. Their supplies were mysteriously disturbed. Items went missing, and they found their tents partially slashed. It felt like a warning. Anxiety mounted. Arguments broke out, and a sense of paranoia gripped them. The forest seemed alive, closing in on them with a dark energy. As darkness fell, Lyudmila Dubinina awoke with a scream. "Something touched me," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. The others tried to console her, but fear was contagious. They huddled together, too scared to sleep, feeling the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching them. On the 7th day, desperation drove them forward. They trekked through the snow, hoping to escape the growing sense of dread. That night, as they camped in Kholat Syakhl, the atmosphere was charged with fear. The wind howled through the trees, and shadows seemed to writhe in the flickering firelight. Around midnight, the forest erupted with terrifying sounds. Unseen forces seemed to move around them, rustling leaves and snapping branches. Then came the screams. Unearthly, bone-chilling screams that echoed through the night. Panic set in, and the group scattered into the darkness. Igor Dyatlov tried to keep them together, but the terror was overwhelming. Lyudmila was the first to break, sprinting into the woods, her cries echoing through the trees. The others followed, each gripped by an overwhelming fear that drove them into the freezing night. They ran blindly, the cold biting at their exposed skin. Some tried to find refuge back at the camp, but the sinister presence seemed to stalk them, driving them further into the wilderness. They could hear the screams of their friends. Eventually, they succumbed to the freezing temperatures. Their bodies were found weeks later by rescuers. The eerie circumstances of their deaths and the strange injuries they sustained left investigators baffled. The journals they left behind painted a picture of escalating terror and an unseen force that seemed to hunt them. The name Kholat Syakhl, or Dead Mountain, seemed eerily fitting. The mystery of what truly happened that night remains unsolved, but the chilling events and the supernatural occurrences have led many to believe that something far beyond our understanding haunts the slopes of Dead Mountain. And that's the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a tale so chilling and mysterious that it continues to haunt us to this day. Was it a supernatural force, a government cover-up, or something even more sinister? We may never know, but one thing's for sure. The 9 hikers who ventured into those unforgiving mountains left behind a legacy of fear and speculation. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please subscribe to Supernatural Secrets and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and may the mysteries of the supernatural continue to captivate your imagination. This is Supernatural Secrets signing off.